Okay, so my presentation is over geothermal. Geothermal is an inexhaustible energy resource because the heat that it utilizes comes from the decay of naturally occurring radioactive elements in the ground, so we're going to have access to it for billions of years. When you're talking about using geothermal as a consumer, there are two main ways that you can do it. You can use it to directly heat a building, or you can use it to produce energy like from a geothermal power plant. So when you're using it to directly heat a building, you use a ground heat exchanger. So a series of pipes called a loop is buried in shallow ground, which is the upper 10 feet of the earth. And this shallow ground keeps a constant temperature of around 50 to 60 degrees Fahrenheit throughout the year. And fluid is then pumped through that loop, and it exchanges heat with the ground as needed to either heat or cool a building in the winter or the summer. So if you're trying to warm a space, the fluid will come through the ground and absorb heat, and then as it moves back up into the house, it'll distribute that heat into the space to make it warmer. And then in the summer, as the fluid flows through the ground, it distributes heat with the ground so that it can become cooler, and then as it goes up into space, it can absorb that heat from the area and make the room cooler. When you're talking about geothermal power plants, there are three different kinds. You have dry steam plants, flash steam plants, which are the most common, and then binary steam plants. In a flash steam plant, you're tapping into a reservoir of water that's around 360 degrees Fahrenheit. So the water will flow up through a well due to its own pressure, and then as the pressure decreases, it's able to evaporate, and that steam is guided through a turbine, which is attached to a generator. After it moves through the turbine, then it goes to a condenser, where it can be turned back into water and then returned to the reservoir so that the system can repeat indefinitely. When you're talking individual pieces of that power plant, you have your well where the water is drawn up from the reservoir, then low pressure tanks where it's allowed to evaporate, and then some kind of system that brings it through your turbine, and then from the turbine it goes to the condenser where it's turned back to water and then flows through a pipe system back into the reservoir. There are multiple different advancements being made in geothermal technologies. So you have enhanced geothermal systems, or EGS, which allows for geothermal in areas that don't naturally support it. So either there's not a naturally occurring reservoir there, or there's not pathways to the rock that allows that water to be easily accessed. EGS allows for a geothermal power plant in that area. There's closed loop geothermal, which is pretty much exactly what it sounds like. The fluid never leaves the system, so you just have a pipe that's buried in the hot ground, and as the fluid moves through it, it gets hot enough that it can evaporate and then move through the system, and it never leaves those pipes. The Deepen project is specifically looking at super hot geothermal, which is, again, pretty much exactly what it sounds like. It's reservoirs that are hotter than 360 degrees Fahrenheit, and they have the capability to produce even more energy than a normal power plant.
Is that things like Yellowstone and stuff? For those hot spring stuff?
Yeah. And then a really good example of geothermal in use would be Iceland. They run almost 100% on clean energy, and they have 5 major geothermal power plants. And those 5 plants provide a quarter of the country's entire electricity and 2/3 of their home heating.
Wow. Do we have many of these in our country?
I think there are only a couple.
Okay.
I think, you were talking about Yellowstone, I think those kinds of geysers would be dry steam instead of flash steam, because it just draws the steam straight from the reservoir instead of the water and pulling the water up and having it evaporate in the system. So the steam is the only thing moving through the actual plant in those ones.
Awesome. So the whole loop is just in the top 10 feet of the ground?
For heating,
okay.
The loop is in the top 10 feet of the ground.
Okay.
But then when you're talking production plants, you're going down to tap into a reservoir of water that can be farther down.
Okay. Interesting. Any questions? All right, round of applause. That was very, very good.